There we go again. We can start again after this. No, it was a great moment with Stéphane Garelli. It always is great moments with Professor Garelli, I must admit. I hope you enjoyed it too. We're a couple of minutes late, but he had a few selfies to do. Not only is he an economist, but he's a rock star. So let's go with the next panel. We were mentioning with Stéphane precisely these digital transformation and all the impact of AI, e-government, smart cities, digital technologies. We're going to be talking about precisely in this roundtable number 3 about technology and governments with our guests today. Our panelists are Chee Khern, who was with us yesterday already, a permanent secretary under Prime Minister's Office, chairman of GovTech in Singapore. Diego Morona, who was also there yesterday, also former Minister of Technology in Colombia. Pichet Durongkaveroj, former Minister, excuse me for the pronunciation, former Minister of Digital Economy and Society of the Kingdom of Thailand. Marten Kaevats, National Digital Advisor at the Government Office of Estonia. Estonia is always a great example for all of us when we talk about digitalization. And as a moderator, Michael Wade of IMD, Professor of Innovation and Strategy at IMD, and you hold the Cisco Chair in Digital Business Transformation. You are also Director of the Global Center for Digital Business Transformation and IMD and Cisco Initiative. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. So as you mentioned, I run a research center here at IMD on digital transformation. Mostly we look at the opportunities and threats for companies, for organizations, or individuals. But we also spend a little bit of time looking at what it means for governments. So digitization and digital transformation for governments. And what we see within governments is some of the very, very best examples in the world of digitization and digital transformation. But we also see some of the worst examples. And sometimes we see both in the same government. So there's a huge variance, I guess, in success when it comes to digitization within governments. And we have a really interesting panel here to talk about what technology and governments can become if they're combined together in the right way. So I won't spend too much time up here because I want to hear from the panelists. But I will say that yesterday I was in Japan, and there was a lot of interest in the digital competitiveness rankings that Arturo Center released last week. And can you guess where Japan sits within the ranking? There's 63 countries that are ranked. What would you think, Japan? 10? 20? 30? Are we going to hear 40? Are we going to go all the way up? So it was 23, which they were not particularly happy about, and they were complaining a little bit. I said, no, that's Arturo. You talk to him. Don't talk to me. That's his. But I think, like all these stories, it's the actual story of Japan, like many of your countries, is more complex than just one number. Because when you look at a country like Japan, you see that they're number 1 or very close to number 1 on some key areas like broadband penetration, mobile phones, mathematics. They're really, really close to the top. But then in other areas, they're very close to the bottom. In fact, they're dead last. Japan is dead last in business agility. So the ability of businesses to change and be responsive over time. They're dead last in the number of foreign workers in their companies and the experience of local Japanese outside of Japan. And they're dead last on digital education. So I think what you see, and it's the same, I think, with many of your countries as well, it's not just a simple story. There's a complex story about how countries and governments are responding to the opportunities and threats that are brought forward by digital disruption. So the way I'd like to run the panel, I have some questions that I want to ask the panelists, but also we'll, as we have done already, we'll open it up to see if you have any questions for them, and we'll make sure we prioritize those. So the first question that I'm going to ask, and each one of you can answer it for your own country, is a simple question. The question is, to what extent has technology in your country improved people's prosperity and quality of life? All right, so why don't we start right here. Marten, would you give a crack at answering that question for us, please?
So hello everybody, and first thank to Arturo for this really good quality event we got going on here. I'm the National Digital Advisor of Estonia, which means that I'm responsible for information society and innovation. In my country, it's a kind of an in-house visionary position, so I work with all sorts of new stuff and try to make that understandable also for the bureaucratic apparatus and also for the society at large. So like, if the question is that how has this digital stuff actually improved our lifestyle, it's pretty easy thing, like a no-brainer. In Estonia, we have not used penny paper for 10 years. Basically, we can do everything online except getting married and buying, selling real estate. We just think that basically getting married alone, like Tinder, that's like not how it's supposed to be. And real estate is just one of the most important things people do in their lifetime. So we keep it in an analog way because it's safer. We managed to help people's life because, well, for example, like, I don't know anything about taxes and I don't really want to know. It's not my cup of tea. I probably spent less than 15 minutes in the whole of my lifetime to declaring taxes. This year I did it in 18 seconds. The average in Estonia is 3 minutes. So that is a very simple example of how to actually make people's lives better. Through that, we basically have the most efficient public sector per capita globally. So we actually also not only like save money, but we also are able to deliver good quality services. But really important to understand in this context of technology and governments and competitiveness and stuff like that is that this whole ecosystem is based on values, and this is something that we actually need to understand, and many of the governments globally, I would say, don't. The Estonian ecosystem is based on the idea that every citizen is the owner of their own data and in control of it. So we have this kind of a humanistic approach, which basically does not have Big Brother included in the architecture. We don't have the central server, so if talking about competitiveness, talking about technology and governments and stuff like that, I would like to, and I had this short discussion previously with Arturo as well, is that in this particular context, I would not use the word competitiveness. I would use the word collaboration, because this word is quite often misunderstood for somehow being better. Like, people are used to these type of exponential growth curves, the hockey stick schematics. But the hockey stick only basically works in this high-tech industry, like in Silicon Valley and maybe some other startups. But if you see this hockey stick when you go to a doctor, for example, and doctor shows you some metrics and it's a hockey stick, then probably he or she will tell you soon the date of your death, because it's not normal to go in this exponential growth curve in terms of health statistics. Or if you see this hockey stick in governance, then probably there's a likelihood of corruption. I think it's important to actually have a plan, and if we look at the world globally now, we see there was a discussion, and this is where the competitiveness angle is in there. Like, you see China doing decentralized information system where government is in control. You see US doing quasi-decentral corporate control information systems with Facebooks and Googles. Yeah, European Union is slowly taking the steps with GDPR to the more human-centric approach. But in reality, I could argue that Estonia, together with Finland, has the best distributed architecture in the world without Big Brother, based on the values that every human is in the center, actually. And this is something that we are trying to build in Estonia to show the world that this type of governance is actually possible. But as we are a 1.3 million people country, we only thing we can do is show that this model works, and this model works in a scalable way. And it's all about building trust and building distributed trust mechanisms into the architecture. But it's also about bringing everybody along, because our digital policies always have had we don't need to worry about startup guys. Those guys can manage themselves. They are tech savvy and so what. We need to worry about the less fortunate. So education and things like that are a very important part. And this is something that we're working on and hopefully making the life better for our citizens as well.
Martin, do you think it can scale?
Yeah, definitely. The thing is that usually we get lots of delegations. We get roughly 825 delegations per year to investigate such architecture. This architecture has been built scalable from ground up. Main lesson learned from the 20 years of building a digital society in Estonia is that technology actually has got very little to do with it. This is about building a mindset and culture for openness and for adaptation, being adaptive. And we always, from those delegations, the two questions usually arise, that, hey, you could do that because you can reinvent your country. In 1991, we regained our independence from the Soviet Union. So we had a clean sheet. And secondly, because you're small. Like levels of trust are higher in a community that's small because everybody knows everybody. We can argue that because, for example, there are distributed trust mechanisms. For example, with the example of platform capitalist, Uber, or Airbnb being better example, showing where trust, yes, is a cultural thing, but it can be scaled via some sort of platform technologies, like two complete strangers sharing a valuable thing in an apartment or a car or whatever. So trust can be scaled, and there are some system architecture angles that can be leveraged within whatever cultural context. But still, this takes much longer. There is academic research also about it. People's expectations follow this hockey stick. They expect some new gadgetry come, and politicians are promising, again, the French thing, Emmanuel Macron can put 1.3 billion euros on the French AI strategy, but he cannot deliver because France is fundamentally a paper-based bureaucracy. In order to make a change, you actually have to change the system systematically, which means between the years, and changing that takes longer, and this is a linear rather than an exponential process.
Okay, thank you. Thailand, much bigger than Estonia, older than Estonia, in some ways more complex. What have you done in your country to use technology to improve the prosperity and quality of life?
And to be humble, we are learning from Estonia as well. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Professor Wade. Thank you, Professor Arturo. And congratulations on the 30th anniversary. How many of you have been to Thailand? Please raise your hands. So I don't have to say anything, right? So I would skip the context of Thailand because you have touched somewhat what Thailand is all about. But it's a complex system. It's not just sun, sea, sand. It's not just Phuket or Samui Island. Okay, it's not as rosy. However, I think what I can share on this stage is the experience for the past 3 years of our thoughts of especially the implementation part. You know, we try to do away with spending a lot of time on just public policy planning because there's so many plans already without any implementation. So my job for the past 3 years is to look into the so-called digital transformation. To me, I still don't know what it is, but I have done a number of things. Hopefully, we'll follow what Professor Garali was giving us the wisdom that, do it, but you still don't know the impact. So let the next minister capture the impacts for better or for worse, hopefully for better. What I would like to share with you is that 3 years ago, we made a decision that transformation needs change, and the first change that we can do is change from the government itself, because that's in our capacity, right? So number one action that we did was to terminate the old ICT ministry and come up with the enactment of a new ministry called Digital Ministry. It's a ministry of digital economy and society. Why we say that? Because we understand in a painful way that if we concentrate on economic development without looking into how the social disparity is moving on or not moving on, then we are not going too far. In a matter of time, there'll be explosion, social explosion. So we made sure that this time around, we want to make sure that the first priority is not competitiveness, but to reduce or minimize social disparity. Number two would be competitiveness, and number three would be sustainability. So with these three core principles, we have been using to guide us toward what type of digital implementation programs should be carried out. The second stage of our thinking is the how question, and this is very difficult, as many of you may have witnessed. Number one, how are we going to break the legacy system? In simple terms, how do we change the analog system into a digital system? Analog society to a digital society. Analog people, especially in the government circle, into the digital people. And the rest would follow suit. Because in the end, what we want to do is to make sure that our digital programs would make sure that we have a sustained growth, quality of life, many of the things that we have already mentioned. Okay. So let me just very briefly give you the 5-track programs that we think is part and parcel of digital transformation of Thailand, which may be very different from many other countries. Number one, we think that the program needs to be launched first with digital infrastructure, with the notion of availability, accessibility, and affordability to everyone, not just people in Bangkok or not just people in Phuket Island. So we made sure that we have a program called Village Internet by providing broadband, fiber optic connectivities to 75,000 villages in Thailand, a little bit bigger than Estonia. Yeah. With that policy, we have now achieved about 80% of all villages. So by the end of next year, we'll complete the whole Thailand, and we hope that we'll be able to start kicking off a lot of implementation, application, and useful activities, not by the people in the metropolitan, but by village people. They can become smart farmers if they want. Without infrastructure, it's a bit difficult to do. The other infrastructure is soft infrastructure. We understand that there's a lot of pressure to make sure that our legal infrastructure is in place, especially digital related. So now about 10 legislation have been in place, including data protection. It's good that GDPR is there because it forces us to really, in a quick way, doing it. Cybersecurity law is in place, electronic transaction is in place, and so on. That's number one. Infrastructure must be in place. Number two, we noticed that through the work of IMD, Thailand is lagging behind a lot in terms of innovation. Digital innovation is also something that we must try, but we are not going to do everything. We are not going to have killer applications everywhere. Just a few things that we can be good at. For example, precision farming. Can we be good at that? IoT for agriculture, can we be good at that, and so on. So with that thinking, we have now established the so-called the first digital park in the country, so that it will be the innovation hub for not only the domestic players, but also international players. Yesterday, we talked about smart cities. And I must say that in Thailand, the first smart city, if I may, would be Phuket Island. For the past 3 or 4 years, we have been working a lot with the business people in Phuket Island as well as the local government. The one thing that I want to highlight here is that through that collaboration work, we now have the business, the local people, the private sector, assemble, pool the resources and establish their own Phuket city development company so that they can work with the local government. And this has been very, very useful. Many other provinces are now copying that model. So this is the PPP, and if I may, it should be PPPP from today on. And that is public, private, and people partnership. Because in digital world, you cannot neglect the people. Number 3, I would like to highlight the fact that the government itself is a big problem. So to turn around, we may have to do something so that the government would be more efficient, not only to provide service to citizens, but also to ease of doing business for the economic development. The strategy is big data, as Professor Gurley has mentioned. Why? Because every government agency has a lot of data, underutilized and unutilized. So now to provide service so that each and every public agency who needs help in doing big data analytics, we now have a service center trying to do that for them. And in conjunction with that, we also established the so-called government data center and cloud service so that they can make use of this and reduce the budget. People is very happy because it reduced the budget for at least 30% from buying the hardware and software repeatedly. And last but not least, we have designed, and thanks to Estonia, we look at your crossroad example. We have now an architecture design of the government one-stop service system so that we don't bother the citizens with a lot of paperwork anymore. Last but not least, the other 2 items that we need to do more is the human resource development in digital, which is fundamentally very difficult because from the university point of view, it's still a 4-year program. And in digital world, we cannot wait that long. So now we are working with the private sector so that we can do short-term training, so that we can pool enough people to do a lot of work today. Last but not least, cybersecurity. The reason we have to attack this question is that it can be very damaging once it happens. So now, apart from the law of cybersecurity, we now also have a center to look after, but very humble and not high profile because it's prone to be attacked if you are too high profile. But the good thing is that it is coordinating with different major sectors, financial sector, energy sector, public health, so that each sector would have the so-called critical information infrastructure and the team to work on trying to cope with the problem from prevention to forensics if it did happen. So in all, I think this is some of the examples that I think we tried. We still have to make assessment, as Professor Gurley said, of the impact of these programs, and hopefully is part of the significant digital transformation that a country like Thailand, a middle-income country, should be going through in order for us to develop into the future, and hopefully in certain aspects to be able to leapfrog and giving hope to our young generation, the startups, for example. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Diego, have you figured out the how? Seems like in Thailand they've spent a lot of time and energy putting it into practice. What about you?
Michael, in Colombia, as I said yesterday, the main objective was how to reduce poverty, and in our case, how to reduce poverty using technology. So the first thing we found is that we didn't have infrastructure, and the infrastructure has to be in place. So we deploy infrastructure everywhere. Today, every single town in Colombia is connected to a high-speed network, 96, 97% of them with fiber, some of them in the middle of the Amazon jungle with microwave, but every single village with more than 100 inhabitants is connected. So that's checked, and we did it through a kind of populist way, and I really enjoyed that. That's why I became the #1 person in the polls for 4 years. Why? Because we did these shows. Because young people, when you ask young people in those towns if they want a better road to the town or fiber, they always said fiber. So we went there to those towns and connected the town, and then give tablets and computers to kids for the schools. That was very populist. But that gave me the political power to change the rest, to influence the rest of the ministers to change. For example, the Minister of Labor. The Minister of Labor was a politician, like most of my colleagues. He wanted to be the next president of Colombia. So I went to his office and I told him, look, you have to move to the digital world. And he said, how come? He's like, look, all the labor procedures in the government, they have to be online. He said, people don't care about that. Social security payments, people don't care about that. But what about if I make you the guy creating a lot of jobs in Colombia through teleworking? So we designed this program for him to transfer. So we joined forces with Microsoft, and that's a credit for Microsoft. I called the president of Microsoft and said, you have to help me because I cannot do that. I don't have the ability to do that, but you have to work with your lawyers and tell me what we have to change from the labor code to allow teleworking, and they did it. So, and I told the Microsoft president, look, the next May 1st, which is the Labor Day, you're going to have in your office the president of Colombia and the Minister of Labor signing the change of those rules, and we did it. So we changed the rules. So the Minister of Labor was really proud every month saying, we've created so many, and we created almost 400,000 new jobs with teleworking. So he was very, very proud. So, and we did that with every single ministry, because the issue, as you said earlier, this is not about the infrastructure, this is about the use of technology, the impact of the use of technology. So, for example, we went to the Minister of Finance, and I told him, look, you have a big issue with the informality of the economy. Let's make a deal. Let's eliminate taxes for technology, especially value-added tax, import duties, for all kind of devices and technology. And I connect the SMEs so that they can have an online bank account, and you can track them and make them pay taxes. I said, that's a deal. And with Intel, we were tracking that. So that was great. It worked. It worked. And then I went to, and told him, look, let's do the first fintech law in Latin America. What is fintech? It's like, let's just let startups provide banking services. So, because the banking penetration was just 35%. Just 35% of adults had a bank account. And so I told him, look, let's go to Congress and change the banking regulations, the banking laws, to open up the market for these new startups. And he said, that's impossible. The lobbying power of banks it is very high. So we went to the banks and we told them, look, banking penetration is 35%. If it is not 50% in 2 years, we go to the Congress. So 2 years later, it was just still 35%. So we went to Congress and passed this bill. Today, banking penetration in Colombia is 72%. So it is huge. And that growth is just basically online banking and a lot of innovation in that sector. And the Minister of Finance is happy, and he's popular, and he gets votes for that. He gets approvals for that. So that's what we did. I went to the Minister of Education. I wasn't that successful. We have to transform the education system. So and then we told her, look, we have a budget, I'm going to sponsor about 26,000 university people to study tech careers. And the first thing I found, which was depressing, is that people didn't want to study that. So we always tackle the issue from the supply side of education. But then we found out that there is also a big bottleneck in the demand part of it. And that's the most important issue, and IMD has said that for many, many, many years. The big issue of the digital transformation is talent. And we need 4 types of talent. Of course, we need the developers. You know, in the case of Latin America, you have today a lack of more than almost 100,000 developers in Colombia, 70,000 in Chile, 5,000 in Panama, 8,000 in Costa Rica. Everywhere you need developers, big time. But people don't want to study that. The second talent we need is women. Big time women, and we're seeing that here, but women. We need women to do the digital transformation, you know. The third type of talent is that everybody, every single professional has to understand this new world. And it was depressing, just like you know, doing polls and interviewing people who just graduated from elite universities in Colombia, who didn't understand the world, the new world. So doctors, lawyers, accountants. And so we need, again, as Pichet said, we need to transform higher education. That's why after I left the government, a friend of mine told me, hey, why don't you put your money where you put your mouth? Because I was, you know, doing that, and now I own and run a university in Colombia, Panama, and Costa Rica with 50,000 students. I took it with 14,000 students 3 years ago, and we are growing very fast, and we are focusing on producing the talent for the new economy. Put for the base of a pyramid. These kids come from very, very poor families, and we are transforming them to be ready for the new economy. And then the fourth type of talent that we need is leaders. Leaders. We don't have the leaders. Today, we don't have the leaders. Not only don't we have it for the private sector, but also for the public sector. That's a huge issue. Like, I passed a law in Colombia and to make sure that every single government agency has to have a CIO reporting to the head of the agency. We don't get those people. There is no people, there is no talent, there is no leaders. You don't find today in Latin America people with the abilities to be the right Minister of Health, with the digital abilities to transform the health industry, or the finance. Of course, you don't have the people to work for the private sector. That's, for the public sector, is more difficult because we are not Singapore.
You know, Chee Khern, you're probably sitting there thinking, we figured this out, right?
Yeah.
You're number 2 in the Digital Competitiveness Index, the Smart Nation, you're the chairman of GovTech. But have you finished the journey? Is there still more to do within Singapore? Are there still challenges that you need to overcome going forward?
Maybe if I could start from where we began. The question is how technology has benefited. In some ways, the answer is very obvious from just very headline numbers. So in 1965, the Singapore GDP per capita was about US $500, which was at the level of about South Africa and Mexico. In 1990, we were at about US 13,000, and we were at the level of where Israel, Portugal, South Korea was. In about 2012, 2013 or so, I think our GDP per capita overtook the British GDP per capita, which, as all of you probably know, the UK was our colonial masters. And then today we are at about US 50 something, US 60,000, which is at about the level of the US and most of the sort of North European countries. So Where did all this GDP per capita growth come from? Clearly, it's from not resources. For those of you who have been to Singapore, we have no land resources, we have no natural resources. The only thing that we have is people, and of course, people need something to work with to sort of deliver that GDP per capita growth. And really, what do we have to work with is technology. But organizing ourselves to make good use of technology to deliver that kind of benefits is not straightforward. And most of the time, I think we would focus on the competence of how to get technology to work for us. And that is a huge topic in itself, which we can spend a lot of time on. But in addition to how to make use of technology to work for us, it's also whether the government is seen to care. It's not just whether the government is seen to be good enough or competent enough, but whether the government cares. So let me break these two factors down. In the first place, how to get technology to work for us is at different levels. At the first level, individuals must be ready to use the technology, must have the attitude that they want to use the technology. So yesterday we heard from the ex-Prime Minister of Finland about PISA scores. Singapore is very similar to Finland, very different school systems, and in fact we keep sending study teams to Finland to learn about their school system. We achieve very similar results as the Finns do. I think Singapore has been top of the math PISA scores for the last 10 years. In science, it's 1 or 2 or 3, and in reading, it's again 1 or 2 or 3 among the top 3. But the school system is very different from Finland. But the conclusion is that the students, the young people of Singapore, do have the sort of ability and the receptiveness to being able to make good use of technology. But it goes beyond that, and it's about whether the society and government is in a position to do that as well. And I think this is where IMD's World Competitiveness Index is very useful, because it reminds us that for long-term competitiveness or for long-term growth, long-term productivity, it goes beyond technology. It's a whole gamut of capabilities or whole gamut of abilities of individuals, businesses, governments. And the fact that in Singapore, we sort of make no apologies that government is a very important factor is something that I guess only more recently in academic orthodoxy has been sympathetic with. For a long time, much of particularly maybe Anglo-Saxon economic orthodoxy or academic orthodoxy is that government is irrelevant, as I think what the prof said earlier. We have always thought the government is important, and it's crucial how government organizes the society. I mean, if you have the ability to be strong in government, that's great. But if not, you at least must have a government who is enlightened enough to regulate the society and economy in a way that allows businesses to thrive. So I think that the how-to, the competence part is critical. And it's something that I think we focus on a lot. But in addition to that, when we organize ourselves to deliver the economic growth, beyond that, the citizens, the public need to trust that the government will sort of disperse the benefits in a way that is fair. Again, it's a word that Professor Garelli used, whether there's justice. The benefits of economic growth must be distributed in a just way, in a way that the public beliefs have been just to them, have been fair to them. And that's something, again, that we focus on a lot. But unlike maybe many other countries where the government takes a big chunk of the economy, up to 40-50%, and use it in a way that benefits citizens, in Singapore, we try to strike a balance. I don't know whether any of you are familiar with numbers like that, but government expenditure or government budget as part of the GDP. In Northern Europe, it will be generally, I guess, in the region of 40 plus minus 5%, probably some countries reaching even 50%, where the government is 50% of the economy. In Singapore, I wonder whether any of you want to make a guess. If you think Singapore is so successful, the government seems to be a very strong factor, but what is the government's budget as part of the GDP?
60?
It's 18%. So the government is able to do a lot, even though it actually doesn't collect that much in taxes, even though it actually doesn't spend that much. It leaves a lot of money with the citizens to make use of in a disposable way, as what Professor Garelli said again. I mean, people are happy if they have money where they can use it in the way they want, but yet at the same time, public infrastructure, whether in education, health, transport, are of reasonably world-class standards. So that has been the balance that we have struck that I guess have made Singaporeans generally pretty happy with the government, and it is reflected in the survey that I think the World Economic Competitiveness Center has done for smart cities, where interestingly, if you are familiar with Singapore, Singaporeans are generally quite a complaining lot. Their expectations are very high, but yet in the survey for the Smart Cities Index that IMD has carried out, we seem to have done quite well. And I think that partly has to do with this striking of the right balance between taking enough money from the citizens to establish world-class living environment in the country, but yet leaving enough money in their pockets such that they can spend it in the way they want for their lives, in how they work, live and play. So maybe I'll stop there.
And just to clarify, the number of the percentage of GDP from the government is 18. Is that what we said?
18 to 19%.
18 to 19%, okay. We do have time for questions. If anybody has a question, a burning question they'd like to ask. Kel, of course it would be you. Over here.
Thank you. So Kelly Espersen, I'm an alumni here from IMD. So I think it's very encouraging to hear from Singapore what seems to be a responsible government, responsible use of data. I grew up in Denmark, where the government, I would say, have a bit more tendency to wanting to control citizens. Things like how much time to spend with a doctor, do you shake hand when you get a Danish citizenship, and things like that. Excuse me. So I guess my question is, do you think politicians, they are mature enough and responsible enough to wanting digital to enable the economy, or more to go towards controlling the economy?
Why don't you start, and then we'll see if any of the others have.
It's going to be very difficult to respond in a general way, because governments across the world behave so differently, and definitely can't. In fact, I was in Copenhagen visiting the Agency for Digitalization just 2 weeks ago, sharing experiences and all that. We start from very different viewpoints. In Singapore, the digitalization of the government is really meant to help the businesses thrive. So one of the key things that we are trying to do is to build from within the government the sort of platforms, the sort of infrastructure for the digital age, in the same way that we have provided for the country in the fiscal age. So in the fiscal age, you have, again, just to say, telecommunications, transport, port, airport, even education, even hospitals. Those are in the sort of fiscal world of the previous generation. In the next generation of the digital world, we similarly where we're investing so that we sort of overcome the externality issues and provide world-class infrastructure to businesses to thrive. So whether this is in terms of data infrastructure, whether this is in terms of connectivity, 5G infrastructure, the government is investing in this so that it allows businesses to build on it. The government is building a data architecture, the government is building a tech stack that the private sector can use. We have built a digital identity system that allows the businesses to have corporate identities on, such that it's not just within the government, within Singapore now. We are actually working with other countries such that the digital identity can be recognized cross-border. And if we can actually free up this digitalization into a global way, globalized digitalization, I think that would be really powerful. Such that actually when we travel, whether as tourists, whether as citizens, or whether working in another as students working in another country, where actually crossing the border is actually quite seamless because you recognize your identity of another country that has really provided that. For that, we have built what in Singapore we call MyInfo. MyInfo is a digital identity with lots of information on yourself. Anybody interested, I can show you later. I can go to an app where I have more than 200 data fields of myself that the businesses can make use of. So today in Singapore, when we apply for bank loan, apply for credit cards, apply for a mortgage, we no longer need to appear in person physically. It's just a digital transaction and it takes place in a few minutes. So businesses can build on that kind of ability.
All right, so I mean, that sounds pretty exciting and kind of scary at the same time to maybe some of us. So let me just rephrase the question to amp up the edginess of Kel's question. Can we, and to the other three gentlemen, can we trust politicians to use digital tools and technologies in the right way? Is that more or less, okay, can we?
So, trying to directly answer no. No. It's easy. But, well, Estonia has clearly taken the model of trust rather than control. So if we have not built the system around regulating handshakes and stuff like that, which is a funny example. I think the competitiveness, the digital governance is the competitiveness of the legal environments in that country. So, and as also Estonia has been trying to test out and seeing how it works, we are testing out this with e-residencies. So we're opening our own internal ecosystem up for everybody. And this actually is a very good incentive for also those politicians not to become evil. Because as one e-resident of Estonia actually told me at one point is that, okay, well, e-residence is still not so big. Fortunately, like 3 days ago, Dubai launched their own program as well, so it's kind of a validation of such a concept. But basically, if this type of a scheme or idea would grow, then we as a small country of 1.3 million people, we cannot afford to lose the e-residents. So if this type of competitiveness of a legal ecosystem, or if a politician starts misusing the authority given to them, basically will have very serious impacts to our own ecosystem. Basically, our whole ecosystem is based on trust. So basically also the security people acknowledge that like our system architecture is built in a way that disincentivizes of building backdoors to the whole system. Basically, if the Estonian FBI like organization builds a backdoor, nowadays the ethical question is mainly it's not a question of if the information will be public, it's a question of when it will be public, and at some point it certainly will. So even they make those calculations that when that information would become public and the trust is dissolved, basically our country would cease to exist. So, and this is something that we have kind of built into the culture. So it's from the top level to the very lowest doctor or a police officer who knows that misuse of the authority given to them is considered as a serious thing. And thus we try to build the system on trust, but not too much regulation, but leading by example. So I don't know.
Just a quick note. I think that society is now relatively open, especially when you have the support of the digital means. So instead of the trust question, we may need to look into how to make use of digital technology so that the society will be more transparent. Check and balance can be done. But on the other hand, as we know, there are bad news in social media, there are hate speech, there are things that are not proper to a healthy society. That's another angle that we also have to look. What I noticed lately is that we adults, not only ministers, but we adults are not paying enough attention to the younger generation. We don't give them enough space to express themselves, to tell us, what are the things that are so furious about. And I can detect a number of hotspots, not only in my country, and this is something that I think a number of think tanks would start to look into the sociology of the social media, social networking, the ability of any one person to share or to forward. And it's like Wi-Fi, very difficult to handle but from the government point of view. But I think we upon many aspects in society that is happening in the digital market, we now need to look into the things that can explode in the future. A little pessimistic here, but I think it's better to notice it today rather than let it happen in the future.
Sure.
So
Let's take one more question.
Michael, Michael, can I say something very briefly? And it's a very important point. Again, I start from the point that different countries have a different sort of civilization and all that. I come back to Simon Pei's point yesterday. In case any of you remember, he emphasized that integrity is very important, and it is true in Singapore as well. Integrity is very important, more than competence. In the first place, the public must believe that the politicians have integrity, must believe that they care for the public. And that is the start point. I mean, if you don't believe in that, you don't have politicians who actually live that, then I think you will be in trouble. And once you believe that your politicians, once you believe that your leaders have integrity, that they do care for you, then you trust them a lot to do what they need to do to make lives better for you.
Thank you. Yeah, Diego.
Michael, quick comment. As I showed yesterday, you guys trust the digital world. You guys trust the big companies. But in general terms, people don't trust the governments, especially in Latin America, that's big. People don't trust politicians. But I have hope. Why? Because there is a new trend that we call GovTech, which is different from his GovTech. We were talking about that yesterday, which is that private companies provide the digital government services. So the role of governments is changing from building teams and developing solutions to and buying IT systems to regulating IT systems. So it is a complete change of the role of the government, allowing private companies to provide services, allowing startups to do that. And then what we're seeing is that people trust those startups. People trust those private companies way better than the government. So that's a new trend, growing a lot in the US, growing in Europe, growing in Latin America. And I don't know about Asia, but I guess it is also growing.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you. Do we have time for another question?
Yeah, last question. Yeah.
I think you had a question, right? Let's go to that question.
Thank you very much for this panel. Thank you, Michael. A question about sovereignty. I would love to hear the panelists speak about sovereignty in an age where data and algorithms are controlled outside of the borders.
So I actually have a very short, because the time is limited. Yes, it's an issue, but Estonia, and it's a kind of a spin type of an answer as well. Last year we opened the data embassy in Luxembourg, which means that we have a server room which is legally Estonian ground. So we can basically live switch all our digital services to run from an external server in Luxembourg. So in theory, we're the first country in the world that, in case the original server room actually has a fire or a water leakage or an energy problem, we can switch our services to run from Luxembourg, which basically means we don't necessarily need the physical land to actually exist. We're the first country in the world that can run from a cloud, from outside our borders. And that is a main question of sovereignty for us, for example. Because living next to Russia, we have this kind of a situation. Then we need to think about that stuff. And that, for example, that's one of the practical examples how we do that.
Which is no joke, by the way.
It is not. It's not.
What happened with Ukraine in 2017 with the NotPetya attack knocked out a huge chunk of the government. And any other comments on this question around sovereignty of data? Okay.
It is the topic. You look at what it is happening today to any initiative to create new kind of sovereignties. Look at what it is happening to Libra, the initiative of Facebook. What happens today is that governments do not have the power to regulate the new economy. Because the new economy, digital economy, doesn't have boundaries, doesn't have frontiers. It is very difficult to limit them. But so I also have hope. And what we have to work in the private sector is creating self-regulatory schemes for data that are more dynamic, that create more trust of citizens. And I'm working with the International Chamber of Commerce trying to do that, to create the first framework to regulate globally. Europe started doing that, but we have to do it globally. Because the issue here is how to create trust again, trust from citizens, trust from consumers. So if we create a global code and companies start to join that code, could be a way to manage data in a global way.
I think that is a big challenge. I may add a remark. We are saying we don't trust politicians, but I don't think many people trust Facebook either. So, I mean, we've got here, the big challenge is about trust, and you're right about that. Can I add a last question? It's a lunch break just after. As a member of Swiss Parliament, I'm quite astonished. I've been struggling during 8 years to say maybe we should have someone in charge of digital economy. And I see we've got GovTech, Minister of Technology, Minister of Digital Economy, a digital advisor. And Switzerland, no one is in charge of digital questions. It's weird, isn't it? Do you think, I mean, your office, your ministers were really useful? And what tip could you give us Swiss guys to say, maybe this could be useful at some point? Or you just don't understand why we don't have it, but I don't understand either.
My experience is that we used to have the ICT ministry.
Yeah.
And we found that it's very limited in the scope and the scale that it's doing. So that's why we transform it. But more importantly, the role of a digital focus ministry is not only to do work for its own ministry, it has to coordinate with the rest of the ministries. That's a lot of work, very diverse. One day I work with the transport ministry, the other with the education. So you need a lot of times a focal point that would be able to facilitate what they don't have, especially technology-wise, right? And the technology policy. The rest is like shaking hands.
So, one comment would be, yes, you need some kind of a champion at first, because you need to get some mission critical infrastructure in place, like digital ID. I've heard yesterday that the private sector is doing something here in Switzerland, but you need to get the government involved, otherwise it won't work. And you need to get some sort of the basic data exchange utility or layer going on. And this you cannot do with, you need some kind of central leadership to make fundamental architectural elements in place. Otherwise, you cannot do it.
We hate central leadership in Switzerland.
Yeah, but it does not have to be central. That's the point of Estonia.
I agree. I agree.
There are many reasons why I think setup like, say, my central setup in the Prime Minister's office is important. From the point of view of, say, human resources, I would guess every country right now has a shortage of real good data engineers, good data scientists, real good AI specialists. And when you have a shortage like that, centralizing the resources in a way whereby then you can deploy it to where it's most useful, most impactful, I think is useful rather than to have it dispersed. The second reason I think why it's critical is really that many of the infrastructure will be common. Digitalization has been likened to the electrification revolution of the about 100, 120 years ago. It's the most horizontal of technologies. Mm-hmm. If you think of yourself as a Minister of Transport or Minister of Health, technology is not the first thing you think of when you go into the office. I mean, if you're a Minister of Health, the first thing you go into the office when you think of is the waiting time at your clinics, the waiting time at your hospitals, whether you have enough doctors, not the technology. If you are the Transport Minister, you're thinking of congestion, you're not thinking of the technology. You want technology to be able to horizontally drive the whole economy. You need somebody else to be thinking horizontally across all the ministries. So that's why it's been useful, because you do need to build that sort of digital infrastructure, digital platform. You need to link the data up from different sectors to be able to be useful, and therefore you need a horizontal organization to cut across. Yeah, as I said, the how-to parts of using technology can fill a whole lecture, and I have to stop there because there's lots more to do, lots more to say. I have a lot of analogies from my military days. For those of you who are familiar with revolution, military affairs, literature, from technology, if you really want technology to be well exploited, you need changes in your concepts of operations, you need changes in your business processes, you need changes in your organization structure, you need new expertise, you need changes in your habits, you need changes in your culture, all in. And if you really believe that the digitalization is the fourth industrial revolution, you know how long it took us to get over the second industrial revolution. It took us the fight between communism and capitalism. It took us the fight between fascism and capitalism before we finished the effects of the second industrial revolution. And if you think this is the fourth industrial revolution, I can just imagine how much we have to change. All that we have today, the pension systems, the retirement system, the hospital systems, the school systems are all built in the second industrial revolution. Mm. Digitalization, to be successful, need changes in all of these things.
Thank you very much. And at the end of the day, yes, Michael?
Just many of you are working for organizations, and one of the most common questions that we get in our research center is, should we hire a chief digital officer? Mm-hmm. So it's a kind of the similar discussion, but at an organizational level. And of course, the answer is it depends. But even if you do decide, in order to centralize the portfolio of initiatives, in order to build centers of excellence, in order to drive speed in digitization, even if you decide to do it, our advice is the moment you set up that role, you also set up the end of that role, because it's probably not going to be something permanent. And for the very reason that you're all mentioning, it is horizontal. So it's going to be part of everybody's, whether you're health or transport or immigration or finance. Digital is going to be a key enabler of all those things. So long term, it's probably not going to need a separate group. But short term, they very well may need to.
Switzerland is in advance then, maybe, for once. Anyway, it's all about trust at the end of the day. Thank you very much for this really, really huge challenge. Thank you. And it's time for lunch. We'll be back at 1 sharp. See you later. Bon appétit.